thinkers and activists from across our movement to talk about how we build solidarity economies. I want to start by acknowledging that we meet on the lands of a number of First Nations people. In my instance here on the Sunshine Coast of Queensland, Australia, that's the Jinnabara people. But I note that participants in tonight will be meeting on the lands of a whole bunch of nations, and I want to note that their sovereignty over that land was never ceded. It's also a particularly poignant time to be meeting to talk about solidarity economies and food sovereignty. Today is 21 years since the Mabo decision was handed down in the High Court of Australia. I would imagine most Australians would be familiar with that. But that was the case that overturned the fiction of terra nullius in Australia and granted our First Nations people land rights and sovereignty for the first time 21 years ago. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Nick Holliday. I farm grass-fed beef, free-range eggs, pastured pork, garlic and a few other bits and pieces on the Sunshine Coast hinterland in Queensland, Australia. I'm also on the AFSA committee, the Australian Food Sovereignty Alliance Committee. I would imagine many of you are familiar with the work of AFSA, and certainly you would be if you've tuned into previous Solidarity Economy series, but we're a farmer-led organisation that fights for the right to nourishing and culturally appropriate food, produced and distributed in ecologically sound ways and ethical ways, along with our right to collectively determine our own food systems. We're an organisation that organises and fights for the rights of eaters and producers. We can't do that without a strong and active membership. I know a lot of you guys are already AFSA members. If you're not yet an AFSA member, we need your voice supporting our campaigns. It's the only reason that we can win when we approach government and when we participate in our food sovereignty work internationally. So if you're not yet an AFSA member, I would encourage you to visit afsa.org.au and become an AFSA member after the session tonight. Just a reminder for those who are joining now, we're asking participants to turn their video and microphone off. That'll help people with limited bandwidth. And we'll ask you to turn your video and microphone back on when it's time to ask questions towards the end of the session. All right, so I might kick off. This is the second in our series, and we're talking to Open Food Network. I'm going to hand over to Jen and Lynn in a moment to introduce themselves, but we're very excited to have this discussion because OFN are doing amazing things in our sector. And I might go firstly to Lynn. Lynn, can you tell us who you are, where you're from, and how you came to OFN?
Hi, yeah, sure. So thanks for the invite to be here tonight. Tonight, this morning for me, because I'm sitting in London in the UK right now. So I'm part of the Open Food Network UK team. Yeah, I guess to give you a little insight into my journey into OFN, I came through a kind of food sovereignty movement perspective. I came through being a farmer myself. So I was working as a farmer in the Forest of Dean, which is in the rural west of England. And the farm had to change business models quite quickly from supplying, it was a biodynamic farm, supplying food into a kind of care environment. Suddenly had to change its business model really quickly and had to find new routes to market. And we realized that basically there were no routes to market. So we set up a food hub, which I'm sure is a model that most people in this call are familiar with, and like an online farmers market that didn't use OFN software at this time, and realized the overhead of running software is huge, you know, like you end up spending a lot of time maintaining software. So we started teaming up with other people across the UK who were trying to do similar models, and realized that even to do it on a national basis was an incredibly expensive and difficult thing. And so started to put the feelers out further afield and found the Open Food Network with Kerstin and Serenity. And yeah, the rest was kind of history. We started the journey of porting it to operate in the UK, to internationalize it. And from there, it's really grown into an organization that operates in around 15 countries around the world. I don't know, the number is changing fast right now, so I don't know who's got an updated number. Yeah, so it's really really coming from that kind of grassroots need. How do we get food to people in a very local way, and realizing that a global model of subsidiarity and global cooperation can really be beneficial in such things. Yeah, so that's how I'm here.
Thanks very much for that, mate. And we're gonna take a deeper dive into a bunch of those things a bit later on. I might throw now to Jen to introduce herself from Australia.
Sure, thank you. So my name is Jen Sheridan. I'm one of the directors of Open Food Network Australia. And I came to Open Food Network via my sort of first career was as a journalist, and I was becoming frustrated with reporting on the world rather than creating change in the world. And so went back to do a Master of Sustainability, looking at Master of Environment, looking at food systems, and was working as an academic from that. And that was how I met Kirsten, and she asked me to come and do just a quick 6-week contract to help wrap up a project 3 years ago. And, you know, I just kind of fell in love with what we were trying to do at Open Food Network. And it sort of made all of the side projects that I'd done about food the entire way through my life suddenly kind of had this outlet and this way of creating change. And so, yeah, a couple of years ago, left academia to just focus on Open Food Network and kind of helping Open Food Network Australia grow in a way that we kind of hadn't while we'd been really focused on making all those international connections. And it's been a really exciting couple of years for Open Food Network Australia. So, yeah.
That's fantastic, mate. Thank you very much. So I might actually ask you now, Jen, to explain OFN to people who may not have interacted with you guys before. Can you take us right through how you were formed, what you currently...
Sure, yeah. So Open Food Network was founded in Victoria, in Australia, by Kirsten Larson, who's on this call as well, and Serenity Hill. And they were working in policy and academia in food systems and wanting to take on or knowing that they were going to take on the family farm as lamb farmers, but that they didn't want to do so until some of the things that were really not working in the food system, that they were sort of trying to make them work in terms of, you know, that sort of system of being price takers rather than price makers. And so they looked around and they talked to a lot of different organisations and farmers here and overseas, and were finding that one of the real barriers to getting things to market was the sort of logistics in the back end, and that software was this kind of gap. And so they started building the Open Food Network. And so that was where Open Food Network came from, was a software platform to help make it easier to run community food enterprises. And that's, you know, any enterprise that has a sort of social or health or ecological aim rather than just a pure sort of profit making aim, whether that's a family farm or a food hub. And from there, it expanded globally with a focus on the software and sort of meeting people like Lynn and Miriam in France and, you know, Laurie in the US and all these people who kind of come on board to make it what it is now, where we're, as Lynn said, we've got 15 countries all collaborating on the software. But one of the other things that's come along the way is that we've really also kind of done a lot of other work. And so that's one thing that we are trying to make clearer in Australia now, is that Open Food Network is so much more than software. And so we do a lot of research and consulting work. So we help, you know, we work for both Monash and Melbourne Uni, for example, at the moment, on food systems projects, but we also do a lot of regional food economy development work, so helping people kind of unlock what should happen in their region, and a lot of enterprise support, so helping people understand how other people are, you know, running logistics and how they can kind of structure their business to really thrive, but also to take advantage of collective knowledge. So that's one of the great things as well that's come from having 15 countries collected over the software is that we've also now built all these relationships. So I can take, you know, something that Lynn has told us about what's happening in the UK and make sure that a farmer in Australia is hearing about this kind of idea of how someone else on the other side of the world is running their logistics or their packing or their business model or their governance. And so a lot of that kind of knowledge sharing and pollinating is a big part of what we do as well.
That's amazing. Thanks for that. The thing that strikes me listening to you right now and also researching OFN in preparation for this is the extremely broad range of your activities. You know, right from the way that I might interact with OFN as a farmer, you know, who wants to use the software to connect over a logistics issue or something like that, right through to, you know, your now global focus and your growth story. And I guess that was actually my next question, and maybe Lynn might be the person to speak more about this, but when did you say you started in Victoria, Jen?
So it's 2012 that it was started in Victoria. And I just realised, sorry, I did one of these classic things that we always do, which is not describe what the software platform actually does. So just very quickly, the platform itself helps farmers sell directly. And so you can have your own shopfront on Open Food Network. It also provides a directory, so it has a sort of a mapping function and a groups function where you can sort of, you know, make a collection like an AFSA group, which I know you've recently done to show sort of farmers within a particular group. But then the really important thing that is different about what Open Food Network does is that enables collaboration. And so farmers can sell through their own shopfront, but also, you know, give permission to a food hub or a farmer's market or whatever to stock something in their shop. And all of it's managed through, you know, the kind of back-end logistics where you maintain control over your stock levels and your brand and your product. And it's really a transparent supply chain. Sorry, I just had to say that because otherwise I was like, I cannot believe I've forgotten to describe this thing. But back to you, Lynn.
Okay, so Lynn, can you fill us in about how it's grown in the UK so far? Were you in at the ground floor with this, or?
Yeah, I came in before we were OFN, when we were a group of food hubs looking to try and figure out how to build software together. So I can't tell you many years. It was 2012 when I started my own food hub. It must have been 2013, 2014, when maybe we officially launched in 2015 as Open Food Network. But yeah, around that time. And it has been a journey. So we had our growth story in the UK, I guess, has been kind of a long journey of collaborating with different funders who believed in our vision to kind of try and create these networks of food hubs that provide an alternative route to market where we can create these low overhead business models. Because I guess very similar in Australia, you know, with the food sector is just dominated by cost cutting food distribution models. And it's very hard to get a foot in, particularly if you're trying to sell good quality food. You end up, it's very common in the UK that you end up selling to a kind of middle class consumer, and you get this class system inherent in our food system, which is one of the things we really want to try and find alternative ways to navigate. You know, how do you try and keep the overheads low and leverage the different community assets that you can, so that you can create viable business models and get good food to people without it having to target that kind of affluent market. And so the journey has kind of involved a lot of community building, where not only are we kind of bringing in these different food hubs, but also trying to encourage them to work together to figure out how these different business models might work. And bringing funders on board to try and come on the journey with us. But the growth really, we've seen about 900% growth during the COVID outbreak, it's been pretty phenomenal. It's pretty fascinating that at a time like that, I mean, it helps that, we're online, everybody needed to move online, but also really seeing it happened across the food sovereignty movement in the UK, that that people were turning to food systems that they trusted in a time of crisis, and that really turned out to be local food projects and not the supermarkets. So we've seen this explosive growth right now, and so far we're maintaining it. So a lot of what we're doing right now is focusing on how we can keep this explosive growth, keep people's kind of new buying habits where they're now prioritizing their trusted local farmers over anonymous supermarkets. Yeah, so I think our growth story will continue to be interesting for a while.
That's quite remarkable that you've experienced growth like that. And look, I mean, I promised myself we wouldn't spend any time today talking about the pandemic because I think everyone's probably heard enough of it right now. But a question I did have about that though, when you've experienced that massive explosion in demand, that's demand from consumers. How have your producers gone keeping up with that? Have you been recruiting new producers or?
What's been really fascinating about this pandemic, like what we've seen is the whole hospitality sector shut down, right? So everything that used to go into supplying restaurants and cafes and events and all of this suddenly had to shift. And what we really found is that short supply chains, like the ones that we work with through OFN, they've been able to navigate that really dramatic supply chain shift. So, food hubs would be calling their producers and saying, hey, I know you used to supply that pub, now can you supply us? And they had those links already with their communities to be able to facilitate it, which I think is a big part of the reason why this sector has done so well right now, because the supply chain had to shift overnight. And the relationships that were embedded within our communities were able to facilitate that.
And you guys had a system that was ready to receive that, I guess, which is super important.
Yeah. I mean, the food. So it wasn't own. We had a combination of existing food hubs that were able to kind of make that shift really quickly, and then similar to in Australia, a lot of farmers markets came online and were also able to then, because we had a big community of people able to support and talk through the logistics challenges and support each other through this process. These new food hubs were able to get started really quickly.
Yeah, fantastic. Hey, Jen, can you describe the Australian experience around that?
Yeah, so we had around, I think in that sort of peak period, we had around, 10 times as many farmers and food hubs signing up a week as we normally would a month. And our sort of like existing people who were already on the platform were selling around, I think 3 times as much as they normally would each month. So I think it was kind of exciting to see it as like this, convergence between farmers and eaters both arriving at the same point, and then this really feeling very fortunate to be at that point and ready. Like I think 4 years ago the software might not have been ready, but now it's banging software now. Like it was ready and it like stayed fast, and it didn't crash with a sort of 10 times as many people on it as normal. And hey, like a government website would have crashed under those circumstances. So I think we were really proud that it was this resilient moment for our community, and that I think the thing that's really exciting is that not only were people who were already on there kind of coming, like having this kind of growth moment, but people were just able to start things so quickly, So I think Wollonga Farmers Market decided on a Tuesday that they wanted to be selling, that they were taking part of their farmers market online. And by Thursday they were set up. And, we've seen these little kind of mushrooming up of little hubs around Australia where it's someone local who just really wants to see that food provision continue to happen, or start to happen in some places as well. And it's been really exciting.
That's really wonderful. I mean, the term agility is massively overused, particularly by our government here in Australia. But having that ability is so necessary, and it's just proven through a crisis like this.
Well, we like to think of it as just being like the mycelium network that's sort of there waiting for the mushrooming to come after the rains. So that's the business model.
I love that. And good segue. I want to move from some of this macro stuff down to some more micro stuff. Jen, when we were preparing for this, you shared a really cool story about the solidarity that your platform can engender around yacht ballast and solving logistics issues. But I was hoping people really love those micro level stories about cool stuff that you've achieved through your platform. I was wondering if you guys could share that story and any others of solidarity and collaboration that's been made possible through the platform.
Absolutely. I'll leave Lynn to tell the Dawn Traders story, but just quickly, I think a few in Australia would be, we see kind of the collaboration between farmers. So, whether it's been sort of, I think there's the kind of Prom Coast Food Collective in down in Gippsland, and they've got, I think, have gone from sort of 25 farmers up to 50 farmers, and they're now all collaborating. And this was the moment where they switched into, so they all run everything through the Open Food Network, and they've, through this moment, kind of, I guess, really had the community step up as members, and they're now doing weekly deliveries into Melbourne and across Melbourne. And then the other one that was really exciting, maybe also partly because it's sort of where a couple of us live in Australia, the Strathbogie Local Initiative popped up as well. And I think what's nice there was that it was just two community members coordinating something. And again, it was, a matter of days where they managed to start something up. And it was the kind of collaboration between your kind of usual community groups in some ways and farmers in the region to start something. So I think those are the kind of some of the really exciting, like, people driven sort of solidarity moments. But I'll also let Lynn talk about, the nice Dawn Trader story.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll touch on a couple of different models that we work with here in the UK. So one of our food hubs is called Tamar Valley Food Hub. They work with about 40 producers in rural Cornwall. So they're kind of an aggregation of different producers, a collective distribution model to operate, because it's so hard to make a food sovereignty enterprise work financially. They have a lot of different collaborations that they've done. So one of those is with the Plymouth District Council, where they've run a Grow, Share, Cook scheme. Basically, they've created a bunch of starter farms to train people up in market gardening, and used the produce that these farms produce to create low-value veg bags, which they then work with the council to bring in people who perhaps, they've struggled to be able to kind of have the skills to cook their own food, and often these people have been referred to from doctors' clinics, maybe diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and so diet change is an important part of what they have to do. So then they run these kind of cooking programs with these veg from this starter farm that's basically a funded model that supplements the distribution project in itself. They also sell the fish of a group called Soul of Discretion. So Soul of Discretion collaborate with a local university to do a lot of research into what's the most sustainable fisheries models can be. And so they create this whole narrative around what the most sustainable fish is. They sell it nationally, but they also sell it through Tamar Valley Food Hub. And on top of that, the famous Sail Cargo Alliance. So the Sail Cargo Alliance as the name suggests, they transport sail cargo from different parts of the world, because in sunny England, even if you're a food sovereignty organization, you want to drink coffee, and we ain't growing no coffee here. So things like coffee, olive oil, chocolate, almonds, things like that are being imported into the country through different members of the Sail Cargo Alliance network. So there's a number of different ships. They go to different places. They combine the model with a kind of agri-tourism type model. So it's not really agri-tourism, is it? But people pay for a place to have an experience on the ship itself and get this sailing experience across the seas, bring back produce from different places, and then sell it through the network of food hubs that we have in the UK, like Tamar, and other ones across the country. They'll stop in Plymouth and then sail up to Bristol, and kind of link the world in that way. So it's all really built on a lot of collaborations.
That's yeah, that's really amazing. Thanks for sharing those, guys. I do want to leave plenty of time for everyone else's questions. So please, if you're a participant now, start having a think about what you might want to ask Lynne and Jen, but I've got a couple more questions before we get to that. So first one I wanted to talk about is when I was looking at your website, I saw some really interesting stuff about your governance structures. And you've got really what amounts to a solidarity economy operating within your organisation as well. And I feel like there's a million things you could talk about with this, but the things I really noticed was about the way that you set your prices for people to access the software. And also, Jen, you mentioned how you actually set your own incomes and things like that within OFN. Lynne, sorry, Jen, would you care to share a bit about those two things?
Sure. So one of the things that we have is that sort of each country, each instance of Open Food Network sets its own business model around, you know, what works for them. So maybe I can talk to the Australian one, and Lynne would know much more than me about the UK model. And certainly how we did it was we went out and we phoned, when we were switching to starting to charge for the platform, we phoned all of our users and asked them and sort of talked to them about the value of the platform to their business and what they thought it should cost for them and for other people, and sort of ran them through a few different scenarios of, okay, well, what if it was a producer who was, you know, only selling this much, or someone who's selling this much, and what do you think it should cost for them? And so that was how we came up with our sort of pricing model for the platform, which in Australia is 1% of sales if you're a community member. It's free if you're under $500 of sales a month, or if it's an Indigenous owned enterprise or an Indigenous controlled not-for-profit. And then we have the option to opt in to, say, a 2 to 3% solidarity member, because you want to kind of support the growth of this shared piece of digital infrastructure that, you know, I think it's something like 13,000 farmers around the world are now, you know, contributing to and using. And so there's that option as well. And, you know, I think it's really lovely that probably it's dropped a bit lately with all the new signups of people who are just kind of, I think, rushing on a bit more, but probably before it was around sort of 30% of our users would have opted to be a solidarity member, which is really heartening. In terms of, I might let Lynne sort of talk maybe more of some of the global things, but then I'll also just mention the Australian kind of livelihood model that I think you're referring to, which is, so in Australia, you know, although we charge for the platform, that only makes up about something around like 6 or 7% of our revenue, and the rest of our income comes from our consulting and research work, and doing, you know, we build software for other people as well. So we build serious fair food software, for example. And basically when we were kind of setting up, and all of that work cross subsidizes the platform. So I think I can't quite remember the number off the top of my head, but it sort of costs us about 60% of our outgoings. And the way that we kind of set livelihoods is that we have a sort of mutual livelihood obligation amongst ourselves in Australia, where each of us gets to set a manageable livelihood and a sustainable livelihood of like what we'd ideally like to earn. And each person sets that for themselves based on their life circumstances. So it was partly our way of making sure that if you didn't have as much of a safety net, you could still work for us, and that this didn't just become a type of job that only privileged people can do. So that it tried to mitigate some of that, which we often see where if you're working in startups or if you're working in, you know, riskier ventures or something, it's hard to do. And so as the income of, you know, predominantly the consulting kind of rises and falls, we keep everyone at the same percentage of their livelihood. So we try and keep everyone obviously above manageable, but at times it ebbs up to maybe like 80% of our sustainable livelihoods. If we take someone on who's new into the sort of livelihood model, then we all drop back a bit until we can build it up again. But that's the way that we've tried to make it possible for people who are, who are at different stages in life, or, if a partner lost a job or you had to care for a family member or something like that, to kind of have that mutual care for each other.
That's such an interesting model, and just such a wonderful example of a solidarity economy within an organisation. Lynn, I'll throw to you, mate. Do you want to add anything on that?
Maybe just to explore the global model, how we fund it globally. We do, so in the UK, we try to do quite similar things in terms of having really open conversations about money and financial situation. And it is, because it's a topic that's really fraught with a lot of, it's just fraught, isn't it? There's a lot of kind of fear, a lot of trauma, maybe from different stages of our lives around the concept of money and how we interact with it. And I think this really has been a growing and learning point for the global OFN organization. How do we honestly come to a table and sit and talk about these really difficult subjects in a way that means that we can keep this organization going, but it's not carried by a small number of people? Nobody feels that burden or that weight to try and be the person who carries it. And often that does mean kind of sitting down and having really quite painful conversations about why maybe as an individual we feel the need to hold it, or why we're scared to go near that subject. And that's been, I think, a real kind of pivotal thing in moving through these topics and helping us to actually collaborate. Because the word collaboration is really nice, but there's a lot of reasons that are very personal to us all why collaboration is really hard. And I think a lot of embedded power structures that we carry within ourselves that we will, because of the societies we've born into, that really make collaboration surprisingly difficult, even with the best intentions. And through this, we've been able to come to places where we can have those open conversations and collectively fundraise for a global platform, have difficult conversations when the budgets are running low, and decide who can be paid, what do we need to pay for, who can volunteer some extra time right now, and then with the faith and trust that that we're going to get another funding bid on or something and continue the project. And I think it's those interpersonal connections that really bring that resilience to the project. In a way I've not really seen anywhere else. Maybe
just to add that one thing that's probably unique as well, when people kind of come to us and say, well, why don't you just do your thing this way instead, it would be fixed then, is that one of our really key things is the idea of tech sovereignty, and that what we build is part of a global commons. So we don't, or we never have yet, sort of opened up to investment that requires us to take money and profit from farmers to put back into any investors' pockets. So everything is not for profit, and that's certainly never been the way that we've operated, and don't intend to really. And the idea that for something to be a newer, better system than the Amazons of the world and so on, it requires this kind of democratic structure to it as well, where money doesn't equal power. So the biggest food hub in France doesn't have more of a say just because they're putting more money through the platform. So sort of disconnecting governance and money in that way. And then making sure that what we build is, it's sort of at the point where it's like it's not really owned, it's not owned by anyone now. It is just the kind of the global commons of infrastructure that can be picked up and added to and built on. Yeah, this is really key, like this that we maintain this principle of openness as we've grown, and it has been very tempting at times to explore different ways, but it is really fundamental that everything that we do stays as a global commons that anyone can benefit from, and as long as people contribute to the global, that's all we ask.
That's such a wonderful concept. I'm going to ask one more question before I hand over to the audience. And you guys have actually both touched on, I think, facets of this, but you know, one of the things that I'm always keen to ask people in this setting is, what's difficult about what you do? I mean, it's always, in any endeavour, it's always easy to talk about what works really well and what successes you've had. But can you guys talk about what challenges you've overcome, or what's hard about working in this space for you guys? Jen, I might throw to you first, mate.
Sure. Well, for all that we have these lovely systems, it is still a very resource constrained environment. So like Lynn said, it can lead to challenging conversations between ourselves and also with people who want to use Open Food Network. We would love, you know, I guess to put it into context, we've had about $1.1 million of funding Australian in total since we started. So that's a pretty thin shoestring. And we currently have 2.7 full-time equivalent developers around the world, which is such a poor measure in some ways because there's so much more to it than developers. But we, you know, so we would love to see things moving more quickly. And if we weren't as resource constrained, then that would be one great thing. It can be really hard to have a deep level of empathy for what a farmer or food hub wants built, and to know that it can't necessarily be built as quickly as they need it to be. That's really challenging. And then I think that sort of shift sometimes from like macro to micro of, because we're small teams, we're very sort of up in the contextual, you know, what does this mean for food sovereignty? Where is this going as a whole? How do we make you know, how do we have the most impact that we possibly can while still being down also in the like absolute micro of like, how does this user change their shipping method? And so that kind of ebb and flow can be quite challenging, I think.
Yeah, particularly with an organisation with a remit as broad as yours, with the consulting facet and the software, you know, and everything else you do. Lynn, do you have any challenges that you want to share?
I mean, depending on my mood on a day when you ask me, I might ask what's easy about this, because it is really challenging work. I think, yeah, it's always challenging when your values are at the center of what you do, but at the end of the day, our economy works in the way that it does, and I've got to pay rent, and, you know, no matter what. And, you know, like we're all in that kind of situation where we're trying to straddle the world that we want to see and the world that we actually live in. And I'm making those really difficult decisions sometimes about how we balance that, whether that's having to take some extra work because, you know, of the situation at a current time, or yeah, having to navigate, say, helping a bigger user who might be more corporate to come into our values-based organization in a different way, or like, you know, I think the real challenges for me definitely come from this kind of sticking true to my values, even when it's really, really hard and the whole world says, just give up on your values and life will be easier. Like, yeah, it's hard to sometimes, but at the end of the day, without integrity, what have you got? So
yeah, without integrity, what have you got? That's absolutely true. Look, I might throw over to the audience actually. So for those of you who were on last time, you'll be familiar with this process, but I'm asking that if you have a question to ask Jen and Lynn, can you turn your camera on and put your hand up, and then I'll call on you to turn your microphone on and ask your question. So I've got Sharon Flynn. Sharon, do you have a question, mate? Microphone on, mate.
No, my internet's been going in and out the whole time. Sorry. I'm no good to you.
No worries, mate. Well, does anyone else have a question?
Someone's put a comment in the chat that they do turn their video on.
Hi. I do, if no one else does.
Yeah, far away.
Yeah, so you were talking a little bit before, I think, Lynn, you were about like how to make like it more affordable on the consumer end, because you've got all these wicked strategies to do that for the farmers. And I was wondering what like your plans are to try and do that on the consumer level, because it is like, you know, there's all these policy initiatives that you can do to make food more affordable, like true cost accounting and local procurement, but like how do we do it without having to get governments involved who are slow and often don't do that? Like what's the citizen-led software, you know, horizontal approach? Like what ideas are there?
Really good question. It is really difficult, and I think it kind of, for me, boils down to this question of a balance, like equality versus equity versus something that's transformative, right? So the way that supermarkets get around this is that they have, say, the same tin of tomatoes with 3 different wrappers on at 3 different price points, and so people can choose their price point. And so taking kind of this classic economic model as an inspiration, we explore like having different price points. So maybe within a hub, they could have a discount for people who have kind of said that they would like to have a discount, or maybe sometimes hubs do a kind of pay it forward thing. So they have an option where people can pay extra if they want to. And then that can be used as a credit off other people's orders who've come forward and said, you know, is there a possibility? And so sometimes it relies on people coming forward and self-declaring that. Other times it might be done through, say, collaborating with the local council and having some kind of referral system. But that's the kind of model that we explore. How can you create different price points? Because it turns out that not everyone's ability to pay is the same. So why should we expect everyone to pay the same? And different communities come up with different models around how to make that work, how to be fair for the community so that everybody experiences that feeling of fairness. Hopefully that answers your question a bit.
I think the other one that I would add is that there's sort of, you know, at the moment, there's so much of like the cost of cheap food is externalized onto the environment. So I think that there is very much a sense of how do you also pay farmers for some of those kind of environmental services that they're delivering as well. And that's certainly something that we're interested in, is how could Open Food Network, you know, help create a direct, you know, farmer to consumer carbon credits model, or biodiversity credits model, or, you know, what are the other kind of things that farmers can sell as well that don't have to go through this giant ERS, you know, like emissions reduction fund certification type scheme in Australia? How can you build those kind of markets in the same way that a local food market works, and how can you make that again a lower cost model than the certification that would happen at that kind of scale? Like how can you use remote sensing data, for example, and tie that to your Open Food Network profile to demonstrate what's happening on your farm to be paid for some of those services as well, by a different consumer to the one who's buying the food. But that's a longer term vision.
Yeah, interesting. That's a kind of like, that comes at a policy level in the UK, but I know that Australia is very low agricultural subsidies compared to where we sit. So yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and I'm sure we get actually a much longer conversation about that, and maybe that could be a future topic for us too. I think we've got a question from Liza Barbour.
Oh, we can't hear you, Liz.
Is that any better?
There we go.
Oh, good. I was upside down before. I don't know if you saw me turn my video on. I don't know what I did. Thank you both, all 3 of you, so much for that so far. It's super inspiring. I just think it's incredible what you've achieved to bring primary producers together on this platform. I know that you're involved in some work to close the loop on organic waste. I think it was funded by the City of Melbourne. I'd love to hear an update because I just see such huge potential in the platform that you've created into kind of addressing some of these huge problems that we're facing. So yeah, an update would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. And thank you for the delicious pickles. I have the spicy ones in my fridge at the moment. That project is, so for those aren't familiar, it was a project from the City of Melbourne to look at whether or not we can adapt the Open Food Network platform to kind of, essentially we've built all this software that has, you know, all these farmers out here aggregating things into a food hub and then selling it out to all the consumers out there. And could the same type of infrastructure be useful for organic waste collection from lots of points to aggregation and then out to farms? The point that we're at the moment is it was meant to be a sort of a very much lots of people in the room together co-design project that has had to not have that happen due to pandemic. So we're kind of adapting it at the moment. The point that we're at now is that it seems like for the City of Melbourne, which is obviously the funder, so the focus, there's like, if you have large hospitality, then they tend to have their own systems, so like biodigesters or, you know, organic waste collection. And if you have very, very small sort of, or if you have residential stuff, it's probably going to get picked up in food organics and green organics waste collections that'll be rolled out within the next kind of couple of years. So it was that middle range of hospitality who aren't big enough to do anything on their own, but don't yet do anything with their kind of organic waste. And so we're sort of starting, that's where we're kind of starting from, as that's the kind of, those are the waste generators that we think would have the most benefit from aggregating and sort of and flagging things. But I will say that it kind of comes down to pretty similar to what happens with food, in that we can build software that facilitates a system, but it still really relies on the ground enterprises like farmers and food hubs and so on to run what works for their local community. And so I think the point that we're at now is that there are some things that probably we could work on with Open Food Network to make it easier, and that would kind of align with some of the things that we're already trying to work on for food. So things like working on our API is really important to sort of make sure that we integrate with other things on the internet, essentially, sort of simplest way of putting it, looking at like route delivery planning to make things more efficient, and to sort of help people plan volumes and so on. But at the moment, that's about where it's at. So it's the project still has another 9 months to run, but if people are interested, I really welcome them. I'll put my email in the chat, and if anyone wants to participate or have input into what we're doing, they'd be really welcome.
Thanks, heaps.
We just had a question through the chat of what is APR? Jen, do you want to shoot on that one?
I reckon that's a Lynn or a Kirsten question of what API is. They'll explain it better than me.
API. An API is it stands for Application Programming Interface. It's basically the way that you enable computers to talk to each other. You create this kind of a language for communication, which means the way that we can use the Open Food Network is that we can allow OFN to speak with an accounting software via their APIs, via this interface that creates a common language for them to talk to each other. And then when an order is created in OFN, it can appear in your accounting software. And it's really important to be able to leverage APIs because one platform can't do everything that we need from computers, right? So if we let someone else be an expert in accounting software, we can be an expert in the food sales models, and etc.
Thanks very much for that, Lynn. I actually might take advantage of the fact that I've got the mic and ask my own question that I think a few folks might have in there. The software is clearly such an important part of what you guys do. I'm a farmer. I'm more used to sort of hitting things with hammers and riding quad bikes. Can you guys explain your software as though to, a small child for all of us, particularly me? Jen, I might throw to you.
Sure. Would you like to sell food online?
Yes.
Great. Fill in a form. You will then have a shop on the internet. In that shop, you can sell any of your produce at a price that works for you. You can have photos of your produce. You can have different prices for different customers, like a wholesale customer or a trusted customer in your CSA. And perhaps, do you also want to sell to someone other than just your customers? Maybe you'd like to work with some other local farmers to sell online farmers market. You can click a single, you can just click a single button and then it can appear in their shop as well.
I'm so glad you gave us that explanation. Thank you very much. We've got time for a few more questions. So does anyone else in the audience want to share?
We can talk about other non-software elements of what we do as well, if anyone's interested in those parts too.
We'll come back to Mia's question first.
Sorry, did you say me?
Yeah, yes, go ahead, Sally.
Have you had many like farmers markets and co-ops take up using it as a whole, or has it mostly been like individual farms? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just thinking about our numbers. It's probably, I reckon it's probably in Australia, it would be like a third hubs or, farmers working together in sort of, farmer-led hubs or food hubs or online farmers markets, and probably 2/3 farmers with their own shops, if I had to sort of guess off the top of my head. So yeah, like a hub might have kind of 50 farmers behind it. Yeah. I don't know what it is in the UK or internationally.
Yeah, I definitely don't have international numbers. In the UK, generally, it's kind of led by hubs. Most of the people selling through the platform are hubs, and they coordinate their local communities, or maybe they're a producer themselves, but they coordinate other local producers, because the main benefit that people get is that kind of aggregated logistics. How can we deliver each other's food together? Because last mile delivery is the most expensive bit. So, yeah.
Does that answer your question, Sally?
Yes, thank you very much. That's good.
Wonderful. We have another question. Hey, yes, please. Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much. This session and the last one were amazing. I am just wondering, it sort of seems like there's a lot of stuff happening in Victoria around Melbourne and a lot less going on around Sydney, in the Sydney region. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that, Jen, and what role policy and government policy might play in that.
I haven't sort of thought about what role policy might play. If anyone else has insights, I'd be really interested in them as well. But I also think that a lot of it, I think a lot of it's probably kind of like ripple human relationships as well, of, a farmer starts selling on Open Food Network, and then they talk to other farmers in their region, and maybe they start collaborating. And so I think that has probably been part of why it's kind of flowed out a bit in Victoria, and partly because it was started there, probably, like that we have done more work in Victoria. But in terms of like policy and the barriers there, I'm not sure. And we'd certainly welcome, we've sort of, you know, would really welcome anyone to start using it around Australia or the world.
Fantastic. We've got a few questions backed up now. P. Way, do you have a question, mate? I saw you a moment ago. I think you might still be on mute.
Sorry. I'm interested in how you came about, or what kind of conversations you had in regards to working out your mutual livelihood in the organisation. Like, how was that conversation held? Did certain people have particular training in that area, like they'd held those types of conversations before, or did you work that out yourselves? What was the groundwork like?
I think in probably the sort of the mutual livelihoods conversation in Australia was really the expertise that we brought to it was probably our expertise of everything we've learned from our international Open Food Network community. We've had some, you know, I think that one of the great things about an open source project that anyone can participate in is that people with incredible skills show up and teach you amazing things. So, you know, having people like Lynn come in, or, you know, her colleague Nick in the UK, or Miriam, you know, who sort of started the French instance, I think that other people around the world taught us a lot as well, and really led governance and conversations about finance at different times. I can't quite remember. I think, yeah, I can't actually remember how we started the conversation in Australia. I think it was just that we really felt that there were some people who were kind of always going to, like the founders, Kirsten and Serenity, were always going to sort of feel like they volunteered so much time by choice, but that it can also be a burden. And I think the rest of us really wanted to relieve them of that burden and to make sure that they felt supported by a team in Australia. And so I think that was part of the impetus in Australia. And then part of it was just needing to figure out, could we spend more time on Open Food Network, and how much would it take to be able, you know, what did people need to live to be able to put their energy towards the work that they were doing rather than constantly worrying about money. But I think, I'm not sure that we'd necessarily had any kind of special training. I think it was just very a culture of conversations.
Okay. Were there any particular stumbling blocks that you found, you know, during that process, and also what were your lessons that, I mean, you've been through it once. If you had to go through it again in perhaps another context, what would the lessons be?
I think, yeah, I mean, having like heart conversations where you're sort of talking about what money means to you and why it means that is important, and what your livelihood means to you. But then, you know, I should say, like, it's not all sunshine and mangoes, and like there are definitely conversations that are still hard, and we still struggle with, like, we don't know how to grow a team and bring people in fairly without, you know, like you still kind of have to sort of advertise a paid role, and then once people are part of your culture, figure out if they want to kind of join that livelihood model, or if they would just like to be paid and not ever worry about where the money's coming from and whether it will go up and down. And so we do facilitate both of those things within our team. We're probably kind of 2/3, 1/3 split, I think, in terms of livelihood model versus would just like to show up to be paid.
Okay, so you're able to manage those two needs within the culture.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that the conversation isn't done. It's not like you have the conversation, then you're like, oh great, cool, we've sorted our money issues, you know, like it's such a big topic that carries so much weight for us, for everyone. I think that the conversation is a regular and ongoing conversation, and you know, like it is really hard to kind of dismantle some of these embedded kind of soft power structures that exist, because like in the UK, for example, I do quite a bit of volunteering, and that carries with it in itself a kind of almost, you know, like a martyrdom type thing, where you give a lot, and that creates an imbalance in the dynamic in itself. Like, and the conversation just needs to keep being a fresh one and not rely on things that were decided in the past, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
I find that absolutely fascinating, because, you know, I imagine almost everyone listening today is either farming or in a social enterprise, which, you know, those conversations have such direct relevance to. I think there's a lot of food for thought for all of us there. I'm going to take one more question before we wrap up. We had Jackie Hinchy in line. Jackie, do you want to ask your question?
Nick, I didn't want to ask a question. I just wanted to say that I got the app, and you need to get on there. It's really easy, Nick. Not the app. I just, you know, what did I do? I registered myself. I can do it, so you can too. And you're not on here. I can see it because there isn't a tractor where you are.
Yeah. Jackie's
Tammy, it's your turn.
Role in life is to keep me and my farm business moving. So I'm glad you could all participate in my mentoring session there. Tammy, can you go, mate? And then I might quickly wrap us up.
Yeah. I just have, I mean, I've been sitting here fangirling the OFN people all for the last hour and loving everything I'm hearing. So inspired and delighted by the sharing that you've just done. And I was thinking just then, and I was thinking about after Jen told us a bit about the livelihood model the other day, as a person who owns a farm on unceded Indigenous lands and employs people on our farm, and it's our business. And now has live-in farmhands as well, and interns who come and never leave anymore. So that's the new normal in the pandemic, is they come and they stay. I'm really interested in this conversation about, like, what's the fair livelihood for all of us. Stuart and I certainly live on very little money as a personal domestic need, but we pour a lot of money into the farm, and that balance of whether or not we should be doing that, or whether we should be giving more to the livelihood needs of our staff, or whether we should be finding out the appropriate ways to pay the rent. Like that, the way you've talked about your livelihood model has really helped me think about the conversation for the Jonai community to have, to talk about livelihood and needs and make sure we're distributing it fairly, because, like, I know we're not greedy, but is putting it into infrastructure in the farm the best way to do it, or should it be actually going to more of the humans who are here more fairly? So thank you for the inspiration and opportunity to reflect on ways that farms can also make sure that all of the income is distributed fairly. That's been really incredible. Thank you.
Welcome.
And I just, on my head right now, I think that might be something that we schedule one of our follow-up workshops on, perhaps, because it's directly relevant to so much of what our membership do. So stay tuned for that. I certainly found it inspiring myself as well. Well, look, it's 7:05, and I will wrap us up now. I want to really thank Lynn and Jen for their time today. I found this conversation so fascinating. I hope everyone online has as well. Like I said at the start of this, we will be running these sessions regularly every fortnight for the next little while. So please stay tuned for your invites to our next Solidarity Economies session. And again, I will never stop plugging this, because we are a membership-based organisation. We can't put on events like this. We can't win on legislative change. We can't have a voice at a local level, at a state level, at a national level, at an international level, without your membership and without your voice behind our campaigns. So if you're not yet an AFSA member, please jump onto afsa.org.au. and become an AFSA member. Please check out the OFN website. I've seen there's been a link in the chat already for more information about those guys. Lynn and Jen, thank you so much. I'll hand over to you guys to farewell us, and then I'll close our session. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks everyone for letting us talk about it. We're pretty bad sometimes about sharing all of the sort of story behind Open Food Network. So it's really lovely to have been invited to, and it was it was really nice to be able to. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's just always so great to be able to sit with such an inspiring group of people doing the good work. So thank you all for everything you do as well.
Wonderful. Thanks. Well, thanks so much, guys. And we'll close our session. I'll talk to you soon.